You ever notice how aging seems like this totally different experience for everyone? I mean, you see people in their late 80s still rocking it, living on their own, full of energy, and then others, sometimes even younger, dealing with a whole bunch of health problems. What's the secret sauce? What makes the difference?
It's the age-old question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that, yeah, we see all these different symptoms and conditions that we link to getting older,
Yeah.
stiff joints, heart issues, the whole nine yards. But when you peel back the layers, the reasons our bodies start to wear down, they actually share a common set of roots.
Totally. And that's really what's been grabbing our attention in all this longevity research we've been diving into. There's this recurring theme of 12 key mechanisms that really drive the aging process. And what we're going to do today, we're not just going to name drop them, we're going to break them down, each one. And most importantly, figure out what we can actually do about it. What can we do as individuals to make a difference?
Yeah, because when you think about it practically, even though specific medical advice is super personal, these basic mechanisms of aging, they're universal. So if you can figure out which ones are maybe more active in your own body, your own unique biology, you can really zero in on what's going to work best for you. It's a more targeted, effective approach to feeling good, living longer.
It's like, imagine your phone's always dying, right? You wouldn't just start randomly trying any fix you can find. You'd probably think, okay, it's got to be the battery, and then you'd focus on that. So similarly, if you're always dragging, feeling low energy, the first place to look is your mitochondria, those little powerhouses in your cells. That makes way more sense than just jumping on any random anti-aging bandwagon that comes along.
And that's what these 12 mechanisms are all about. They're the real deal, backed by research.
That's where we're going today. We're going to walk you through each one, starting with the energy crisis happening inside our cells. That's what we call mitochondrial dysfunction. And then those zombie cells that just won't quit, how our bodies handle proteins, the whole shebang. It's going to be a wild ride through the biology of aging.
And honestly, understanding these core processes is the foundation for making smart choices about how we age.
Let's jump right in. First up, mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, remember back in school, mitochondria, those were the powerhouses of the cell, right? But they're way more than just some basic energy generators. They're practically like these tiny little ancient bacteria hanging out inside our cells. And their job is super crucial. They make the energy we need to function, that ATP molecule you always hear about. And you know where you find a ton of them? In the tissues that use the most energy, like your brain and muscles. Makes sense, right?
And the process they use, it's mind-blowing. They take the oxygen we breathe and the stuff we get from food, glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, and they turn out two main things: heat, which helps us stay warm, and that crucial ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. ATP is like the energy currency of your cells. It powers everything, from making your muscles move to sending signals in your brain, even your thoughts.
And here's the cool part. These little guys, they have their own DNA. Separate from the DNA in our cell's nucleus, they can even replicate on their own. That's why when you work out regularly, your body can actually build more mitochondria. Pretty neat, huh? But that separate DNA also makes them a bit more prone to damage.
Exactly. Over time, mitochondria get damaged in a few ways. One that we all know is free radicals. We usually think of those as coming from pollution and stuff. But here's the thing. Even when your mitochondria are working perfectly, making energy, they naturally produce some free radicals as a byproduct. That's why it's so important to support their health. It's an ongoing thing.
Right, it's like maintenance. And then you've got those mutations that can happen in their DNA. See, mitochondrial DNA doesn't have the same protective mechanisms as the DNA in our nucleus. So when it replicates during cell division, mistakes can creep in. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, making copies of copies. The quality gets worse over time.
Another big factor is this process called mitophagy. Basically, it's your cell's way of doing quality control. They identify damaged mitochondria and basically eat them, recycle them. But as we age, this process can get less efficient, and you start getting a buildup of these worn-out mitochondria in your cells.
It's like a factory, right? You need good quality parts to make things work properly. And like any factory, mitochondria need raw materials. If they're not getting enough of the nutrients they need, their energy production goes down. And that means less energy for you. And you know what? It can speed up the aging process too. It's all connected. Less energy at the cellular level means your cells can't repair themselves as well, tissues don't renew as quickly, and your body, well, it starts to show its age.
Now, here's a cool concept. It's called hormesis. This basically means that a little bit of stress can actually be good for you. The right kind of stress, like what you get from a tough workout. That kind of stress triggers your cells to repair those damaged mitochondria and even make new ones. It makes them stronger. And some compounds, like metformin, they seem to work in a similar way.
Fascinating. So it's not all about avoiding stress, it's about the right kind of stress. And these damaged mitochondria, they're not just sitting there doing nothing, they're actually sending out signals that mess with how other cells function. Particularly, they interfere with how cells communicate with each other, something we'll talk more about later. So the question is, how do we help our mitochondria out?
Well, exercise is a big one,
Yeah.
especially high-intensity interval training, HIIT. Those short bursts of intense activity, they actually create that beneficial stress we were talking about because your muscles are briefly deprived of oxygen. And that triggers your body to make more mitochondria, more efficient ones.
So working smarter, not just harder. And then we have supplements. There are a bunch of substances that are crucial for mitochondria to work right. And the problem is our levels of these naturally drop as we age. NAD plus E, that's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, is a perfect example. It's super important for energy production in the mitochondria, and you can actually boost it by supplementing with its precursor, NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. This can potentially give you more energy and even slow down some aging processes. We actually did a whole deep dive on NAD plus and NMN a while back, so check that out if you want the full scoop.
Another really cool one is AKG, alpha-ketoglutarate.
Yeah.
This is a key player in the Krebs cycle, which is like the central energy hub inside the mitochondria. But AKG does more than just energy. It also helps your body make collagen, and it even seems to have a positive effect on stem cells.
It's like a multitasker. I like it. And of course, we can't forget those everyday nutrients that are so important but often overlooked. Omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin C, those are vital for keeping your mitochondria in top shape. And then there's millet, which you can find in apples. It plays a role in the Krebs cycle, too. Now, if you're really into the cutting-edge stuff, there are some compounds like tert-butyl hydroperoxide, sometimes called tert-butylvene, and physitin, that are showing some really promising results in early research. Physitin is particularly interesting because it's found in foods like apples and strawberries. And get this, it's actually been shown to increase lifespan in animal studies.
Yeah, so to sum it up, keeping those mitochondria healthy, it's not just about feeling energized during the day. It's really about slowing down the aging process at the cellular level. It's about aging gracefully from the inside out.
Okay, let's move on to our next aging mechanism, which is, and this name is pretty dramatic, zombie cells. Officially, it's called cellular senescence, but zombie cells, that's a lot more fun to say, right? And it actually paints a pretty accurate picture of what's happening.
It really does. Picture this. You've got a cell that's taken a lot of damage to its DNA. Normally, when a cell gets to that point, it should just self-destruct, for the good of the team. But sometimes, these damaged cells, they just hang around. They're not functioning right, but they're still metabolically active. They're like zombies.
And the worst part, they're not just harmlessly taking up space, they actually release all these nasty substances like inflammatory molecules called cytokines and enzymes called metalloproteinases. And these guys, they cause inflammation and break down the tissues around them. Not good.
Not good at all. And we see this zombie cell buildup happening in all sorts of places. In your skin, it can lead to less collagen production, which one's wrinkles and sagging. In your joints, it can make arthritis worse. And in your arteries, it contributes to hardening of the walls, which can lead to high blood pressure.
It's almost like they're the evil twins of stem cells, which we'll be talking about in another deep dive. Stem cells are all about repair and regeneration, but these zombie cells, they're all about aging and damaging the cells around them. So how do we get rid of these unwanted guests?
That's where senolytics come in. These are compounds that can target and eliminate those zombie cells. The two that have been studied the most are quercetin and physitin. Physitin, remember that one we just talked about with mitochondria? Pretty cool how a single compound can have an effect on multiple aging mechanisms, right? And research on animals, especially with physitin, shows that it can actually extend lifespan, even when they start taking it later in life. This suggests that it could even benefit humans in their 50s and 60s. Typical doses for both quercetin and physitin start around 100 milligrams, usually in concentrated extracts.
Wow, so it's never too late to start. And then there's rapamycin. This one's really interesting. It's an antibiotic, but it also turns out to be a powerful senolytic. It can stop new zombie cells from forming and even kill off existing ones.
Now, it's important to remember that rapamycin is still being researched, and there are potential downsides, like it can suppress your immune system and mess with your blood sugar. And we don't have all the long-term human data yet, especially for longevity. So definitely don't try this at home, folks. We're just here to discuss the research, not give medical advice.
Exactly. We're all about the science here. But it's clear that finding safe and effective ways to get rid of these zombie cells, that's a big deal in the fight against aging.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next mechanism. This one's called loss of proteostasis. Now, proteostasis, that might sound intimidating, but it's really just about the balance in our cells between making new proteins and getting rid of old, damaged ones.
Okay, think of it this way. Our cells are constantly making proteins. Proteins are like the workhorses of the cell. They do pretty much everything. But over time, some proteins get damaged, they lose their shape, or they clump together. And if those damaged proteins don't get cleaned up, they start piling up like trash. Cellular trash.
Exactly. And this buildup of old, misfolded proteins, it really throws a wrench in the works. It's like imagine a city where the garbage collectors go on strike. Eventually, everything starts to break down. And this protein accumulation, it's linked to a whole bunch of age-related diseases. Alzheimer's, heart problems, you name it.
And you can even see it in those everyday signs of aging, that slight slowing down of reflexes or having a harder time regulating your body temperature. That can be partly because of these misfolded proteins building up in your nerve cells. Even if you've been super healthy your whole life, you might start noticing these changes as you get into your 50s. It happens to the best of us.
The good news is our bodies have ways to fight back. One of the main defenses is these proteins called chaperones. They're like the quality control team, making sure new proteins fold correctly and don't clump up.
And then there's autophagy. This is our body's recycling program, where it breaks down old, damaged proteins and uses the pieces to build new ones. It's like a planet that's really good at recycling. We actually did a whole deep dive on intermittent fasting, which is a great way to boost autophagy.
And even if you can't do a full-blown fast, there are compounds like spermidine that can stimulate autophagy without having to restrict your calories.
Options are good. And there are other things at play too, like anti-amyloid substances that stop proteins from forming harmful plaques and proteasomes, which are like tiny shredders that break down misfolded proteins. But the bottom line is this. Those misfolded proteins, they're a big driver of aging and a lot of the diseases that make life harder as we get older.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about altered intracellular communication. This is a super interesting area of research, and some of the early insights came from these, well, kind of controversial experiments called parabiosis. Basically, they surgically connected the circulatory systems of a young mouse and an old mouse.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. And the results were pretty wild. The older mouse seemed to get younger, and the younger mouse seemed to age faster. It really showed that there's something in our blood that affects aging.
It really does.
Mm.
And the implication is that older blood has stuff in it that signals aging to the body's cells.
Yeah.
We're still figuring out exactly what all those substances are, but research points to proteins and peptides, which are short chains of amino acids that are involved in inflammation.
This brings us to the idea of inflammaging. It's this chronic, low-grade inflammation that's becoming recognized as a major factor in aging. It's not the same as the inflammation you get from an injury. It's more of a constant, simmering inflammation throughout your body.
Yeah, and we can actually measure this inflammaging. There are markers in the blood, like high-sensitivity C-reactive protein or hsCRP. Generally, lower levels of this marker are better.
And there are a bunch of suspects for what's causing this inflammation. High insulin levels, cytokines, which are signaling molecules in the immune system, tumor necrosis factor, renin, which has to do with blood pressure, and even some hormones. And the problem with this chronic inflammation is that it's like a double whammy. It directly ages your tissues and organs, and it messes with your stem cells, too.
So how do we fight back against this altered communication and inflammaging? Well, the focus right now is on reducing that chronic inflammation through lifestyle changes. The research we've looked at doesn't point to any specific supplements that target this communication directly. It's more about bringing down the overall inflammation in your body.
All right, let's talk about the blueprint of life, our DNA. This is the instruction manual for our bodies, and any damage to it can cause problems with how our proteins are made and how our tissues are built. This brings us to genomic instability.
Exactly. And DNA damage, it comes from all over the place, both outside and inside our bodies. Externally, we've got UV radiation from the sun, some medications, the chemicals in cigarette smoke, toxins and pollutants in the environment, and even some viruses. Internally, the normal processes in our cells, like making those free radicals we talked about, can also damage DNA.
And this damage, it can really mess things up. It can shorten telomeres, which we'll get to in a bit, and cause mutations in our genes. Now, our bodies have some pretty amazing repair mechanisms to fix this damage. But the problem is, as we age, the damage starts to outweigh the repairs.
One thing that's interesting is that not all DNA damage is created equal.
Ah.
If the damage happens in an older cell that's not dividing anymore, it might not be as big of a deal as damage in a stem cell or in a younger person, because that damage can be passed on to new cells.
It's like a domino effect. And there are some strange observations too, like kids with progeria, that's a rare genetic disorder that makes them age super fast. They don't seem to get age-related diseases like Alzheimer's more often. And scientists have successfully cloned animals from adult cells that have definitely accumulated some DNA damage over time. It's like, how does that even work?
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
This brings us to something called Yamanaka factors. These are special proteins that can actually reprogram adult cells back to a younger, stem cell-like state. And this reprogramming can actually reset some of the age-related changes in our epigenome, which we'll discuss later. Now, using Yamanaka factors directly in humans is still being researched because there are potential risks. But studies on human cells in a lab show that they can actually rejuvenate DNA. It's pretty amazing stuff.
So it's like a cellular fountain of youth. But for now, let's focus on the things we can control, especially when it comes to external DNA damage. Protecting yourself from too much sun is crucial. Always use sunscreen, especially when the UV index is 3 or higher. Remember, SPF, that sun protection factor, it mostly tells you how much protection you have against UVB rays. UVB is the main culprit for sunburns and skin cancer, but UVA rays can actually be beneficial. They boost testosterone, serotonin, mood, energy, and help regulate your sleep-wake cycle. So it's about finding that balance, getting the good stuff from the sun while protecting yourself from the bad.
Exactly. And smoking, well, that's a no-brainer. Quitting smoking is huge, not just for protecting your DNA, but for your overall health. We actually have a whole video on heart health with tips on how to quit if you're interested. And if you live in a place with bad air pollution, using air filters with HPH13 filters at home can help too. Those filters can trap those tiny particles that can damage your lungs and your DNA. We'll talk about ways to protect yourself from internal DNA damage when we get to epigenetics.
Okay, next up, telomere attrition. Now, imagine the little plastic tips on your shoelaces. Those are kind of like telomeres. They're these protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes, and they're made of repetitive DNA sequences. Their job is to stop our genes from getting messed up every time a cell divides.
Exactly. Every time a cell divides, those telomeres get a little bit shorter, and when they get too short, the cell can't divide properly anymore. It might become a zombie cell or just die off.
For a while, people thought that the length of your telomeres directly told you how long you'd live. Some labs even offered tests to measure your telomere length and give you your biological age. But the science is more complicated than that. For example, mice have longer telomeres than humans, but they live much shorter lives. It seems like the speed at which your telomeres shorten is more important than how long they are to begin with.
And focusing only on telomeres doesn't give you the whole picture of aging either. For example, the neurons in your brain, they don't divide very often, so telomere shortening isn't the main thing that makes your brain age.
And get this, cancer cells, they can actually lengthen their telomeres. This lets them keep dividing uncontrollably, basically becoming immortal. So naturally, people worry that if we try to lengthen our telomeres, we might increase our risk of cancer.
That's a valid concern, and scientists are looking into it. But studies on mice suggest that if you support your telomeres occasionally using specific supplements or treatments, it doesn't seem to increase cancer risk. Some of the things they've looked at are astragalus root extract, cat's claw extract, getting enough vitamin B12 and folate, and even hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
So it's like a little boost now and then might be okay. But always talk to your doctor before starting any new supplements or treatments. Now let's talk about deregulated nutrient sensing. This is basically how our bodies figure out how many nutrients are available, and it affects our eating habits, what we crave, and a whole bunch of metabolic processes.
Right, and two key pathways are involved here, mTOR and IGF-1. mTOR is really sensitive to amino acids, which come from protein. So the more protein you eat, the more active mTOR becomes. IGF-1, on the other hand, is mainly activated by insulin, which your body releases when you eat carbohydrates. So more carbs, more IGF-1 activity.
And here's the thing. If mTOR and IGF-1 are constantly active, it can speed up the aging process. It's a trade-off because these pathways are also important for growth and building muscle, especially when you're younger. But when they're always switched on, it can mess with those cellular cleanup processes like autophagy, and that leads to a buildup of damage.
It's like this. When you're growing and developing, you need these pathways to be active. But as you get older, the focus shifts to maintenance and repair. Think about it from the cell's point of view. If there are plenty of nutrients around, it's party time, grow, divide, make more cells. But if nutrients are scarce, it's time to buckle down, repair damage, recycle, and hunker down to survive. You can even see this in human populations. When times are good, economically, birth rates tend to go up. So overeating basically sends a signal to your cells that it's always party time, which might be why calorie restrictions seem to increase lifespan in some animal studies.
So it's like tricking your body into thinking it's a little bit hungry, even if you're not actually starving yourself. Interesting.
But luckily, you don't have to go to extremes. There are ways to mimic the effects of this nutrient scarcity without drastically cutting your calories. One way is through sirtuin-activating diets and compounds. Sirtuins are genes and proteins that seem to counteract the negative effects of too much mTOR and IGF-1 activity. And NAD+ supplementation, which we talked about earlier, can boost sirtuin activity. AKG, that alpha-ketoglutarate from mitochondria, can also mimic some of the longevity benefits of calorie restriction.
And then there are compounds that activate AMPK, like resveratrol from red wine and actoponin. AMPK is another cellular energy sensor, and when it's activated, it promotes autophagy and repair. It's like your cell's emergency response system. If you're interested in specific doses, liposomal NMN is often taken at 300 to 500 milligrams, and AKG is usually around 1,000 milligrams, often with calcium to help it absorb better. And remember, a lot of these interventions also boost autophagy, that crucial cellular cleaning process.
Now, our next mechanism is stem cell exhaustion. This is a really important one, and we'll actually be doing a whole deep dive on stem cells in an upcoming episode. But to give you a quick overview, stem cells are like the repair and regeneration specialists of your body. They can turn into different types of cells, and they can renew themselves so they can keep replenishing damaged tissues. But as we age, we have fewer stem cells, and they don't work as well, which contributes to a lot of the signs of aging and makes it harder to recover from injuries and illnesses.
And in that upcoming episode, we'll talk about all sorts of things you can do to protect and even boost your stem cells. Supplements, treatments, biohacking strategies, the whole 9 yards. So if you're interested in keeping your body's repair crew in top shape, definitely check that out.
Now, let's talk about another type of altered intercellular communication, specifically macrotophagy. We've already talked about autophagy, which is like your cell's regular cleaning routine, but macroautophagy is the heavy-duty version. It's where the cell goes in and recycles big things like damaged organelles or those clumps of proteins we were talking about.
It's like taking out the big trash instead of just sweeping the floor. And when macrotophagy slows down as we age, it can really increase our risk of all sorts of problems. Metabolic diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, even cancer. Because all that cellular junk starts piling up.
Exactly. Macrotophagy is crucial for keeping your cells healthy because it allows them to reuse those valuable building blocks. And the good news is we know how to stimulate it. One of the best ways is fasting. If you can do longer fasts like 36 to 48 hours a few times a year, that can really boost macrotophagy. But of course, make sure it's safe for you to fast. Talk to your doctor first.
And those longer fasts can do amazing things. They can increase stem cell production, help recycle those old proteins, reduce inflammation, and even counteract those nutrient-sensing pathways like mTOR that we talked about earlier. It's like hitting the reset button for your cells.
And if fasting for that long isn't an option for you, there's always spermidine, that compound that boosts autophagy. It can also stimulate macrotophagy without having to fast.
Okay, let's dive into epigenetics. This is a field that's totally changed how we think about aging. Our genetics, that's the DNA sequence we're born with. It's like the blueprint for our bodies. But epigenetics, it's all about how that blueprint is used. It controls which genes are turned on and off in different cells and at different times.
It's a perfect analogy. Imagine you have a neuron, a brain cell, and a muscle cell. They have the same DNA, but they do totally different things. And epigenetics is what makes that possible. It's like a set of instructions that tells each cell what its job is.
And all the stuff that controls this gene expression, that's called the epigenome. Think of it like a pianist playing a piano. Each key is a gene, and the epigenome decides which keys to play, in what order, how hard, and for how long. With so many genes in our genome, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
There are three main ways this epigenetic control works. First, there's DNA methylation. This is where little chemical tags called methyl groups are added to specific parts of our DNA. Usually this silences those genes. And for this process to work right, you need enough of certain B vitamins, especially vitamin B9, that's folate, and vitamin B12. If you're deficient in these vitamins, it can mess up DNA methylation and speed up aging. This is something to be mindful of if you're on a vegan diet, for example, because those diets are often low in B12.
The second mechanism is histone modifications. DNA is incredibly long. If you stretched out all the DNA in one cell, it would be over 5 feet long. And to fit all that into the tiny nucleus of a cell, it has to be tightly coiled and packaged around proteins called histones. These histones not only help with packing, they also control which parts of the DNA are accessible to the machinery that reads and copies genes. So, modifying these histones can either loosen up the DNA, making genes more accessible, or tighten it up, silencing those genes. This is important for things like male pattern baldness, where specific genes related to hair growth get switched off.
And the third mechanism is chromatin organization. This is how the DNA is arranged in 3 dimensions within the nucleus. Genes that work together or need to be turned on at the same time, they're often located near each other in the nucleus. It's all about efficiency.
So, when these epigenetic mechanisms get messed up as we age, it can cause all sorts of problems. You might get genes that should be active in muscle cells turning on in your brain, or genes that can cause cancer getting activated when they shouldn't be. And then there are retrotransposons. Those are like jumping genes that can move around in your DNA and disrupt the code.
What's fascinating is that our DNA sequence is pretty much set, but our epigenome is much more flexible. It can be influenced by what we eat, our environment, and our lifestyle. And while we don't have specific epigenetic supplements like we do for mitochondria, there are substances that can have a positive effect on the epigenome.
For example, lithium, even in low doses, can stimulate protective genes, especially in the brain. Glycine, a simple amino acid, can improve the epigenetic profile of our mitochondria. And AKG, that alpha-ketoglutarate we've been talking about, also regulates enzymes that are important for gene function, development, and preventing cancer, partly through its effects on the epigenome.
And finally, we come back to chronic inflammation, or inflammaging.
Yeah, I think most of us have felt that. When you're stressed out or not taking care of yourself, you just feel like you're aging faster. That's inflammaging in action.
Exactly. It's this chronic low-grade activation of your immune system, this constant simmering inflammation throughout your body. And it's different from the inflammation you get from an injury. It's more subtle, but it can cause a lot of damage over time.
And even though it might not seem like a big deal in the short term, chronic inflammation can really wear you down. It can lead to fatigue, brain fog, just feeling generally unwell, and of course, speeding up the aging process. So how do we put out this fire?
Well, there are a few things you can do. Eating an anti-inflammatory diet is a good start. This usually means cutting out dairy, grains, and refined sugar, kind of like a paleo diet. And then there's exercise. You don't have to go crazy, but consistent low-grade exercise throughout the day can make a big difference. Think short walks every hour or so, or walking, or biking to work if you can. That kind of movement can boost your energy and reduce inflammation.
And there are some great supplements for inflammation too. Serapeptase, which is an enzyme, curcumin from turmeric, and omega-3 fatty acids. Those are all well known for their anti-inflammatory effects.
And we can't forget about stress. Chronic stress is a huge contributor to inflammation. So managing your stress is crucial. Adaptogens like ashwagandha can help balance your stress response. And things like meditation and neurofeedback training can be really helpful for managing anxiety and worry, which can add to that underlying inflammation.
So to wrap things up, it's really amazing how much we're learning about the aging process. It's complex, but we're starting to understand the mechanisms behind it, and most importantly, we're finding ways to influence those mechanisms and slow down aging, not just in terms of how long we live, but how healthy and vibrant we feel.
And as you process all this information, remember that it's all about personalization. Don't just jump on the latest anti-aging bandwagon. Take some time to figure out which of these 12 mechanisms are most relevant to your own health and your own concerns. Focus on what makes sense for you.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about living longer, it's about extending our health span. It's about living those extra years, feeling good, mentally sharp, physically active, and independent. That's the goal.
So as you reflect on what we've discussed today, think about this. Which of these 12 mechanisms really stood out to you? Which ones do you think might be playing a big role in your own aging journey? Maybe that's the best place to start your own research and take action to support your long-term health and well-being.